Now, I'm writing this before the Emmys, and if I had to guess, they probably gave the best drama series to Succession because, rightfully so, it's an incredible show. But unfortunately, if that is the case, then that means Better Call Saul has not won Best Drama Series a single time. And because of how upsetting that statement is, I wanted to make this video and analyze why Better Call Saul is the best show of 2023. So the first and most important reason to me is that Better Call Saul features an absolutely engrossing ensemble cast of characters. They're all extremely deep and have intricate dynamics. It's honestly really hard to pick a favorite, but if I was held at gunpoint, then I'd probably pick Kim Wexler. Everyone in the show I think is outstanding, but Kim essentially excels past them and is special to me because there's a lot of poor examples of female characters in media. Kim as a character I think is a perfect example as to how to write a strong, independent, and fierce woman. The writers imbue Kim with a great amount of ferocious energy when it comes to handling conflict that it makes her captivating to watch. Every time she explodes and eviscerates a character with only her words, it's so mesmerizing because of how smart she is. And this aspect about Kim doesn't make her a mean character or anything, because she has one of the strongest moral consciousnesses in the show. Her desire in wanting to make a difference in the world and help the underdog is a wholly endearing character trait. She's like a perfect storm of characteristics that if written competently makes an excellent character, which Vince Gilligan and the other writers for Better Call Saul do so expertly. There's not a single moment in which I thought Kim Wexler was written poorly or a single line of dialogue was wasted. And that's kind of the case for everyone in the show because of how immaculate and detailed the writing is overall. Another aspect that elevates Kim and makes her even more fun to watch are the characters surrounding her. The general space for law practices in these big corporations are predominantly male-dominated, and seeing a female character break through and trample these characters with nothing more than her wit and drive is extremely captivating and inspiring. The scene in which Kevin from Mesa Verde is disappointed in Kim and contemplates firing her, and she actually reverses the entire dynamic by turning the blame on Kevin, was pure excellence.
And Kevin, I have to tell you, whoever represents you in the future, I hope you're going to listen to them a little bit better.
The show of high confidence and willingness to not back down against people in charge impressed Kevin so much that he wanted to keep working with her. Even the scene where she successfully convinces Lalo that Jimmy wasn't lying about the whole money ordeal was amazing. Jimmy in that scene was floundering, and she actually saves Jimmy and is the one to outpersuade Lalo. Her pure wit, intelligence, and brass nature is infectious, and those characteristics combined with her gender makes her a massive role model. Like, I can honestly just watch a Kim Wexler spinoff show where she demolishes people in court every episode. She's essentially the people's champion, and another thing that is pretty refreshing is the writers don't wave around the fact that she's a female. They're solely focused on creating a compelling character because at the end of the day, whether you're a guy or a girl, you have your own set of strengths and flaws. And one of my favorite moments for Kim as a character was a scene towards the end of the show where all of her emotions essentially boil over and she breaks down in public. Throughout the show, she's had a strong exterior and rarely showed a lot of vulnerability emotionally. However, in this moment, since she's essentially dredging up the horrific past of Howard's demise, and she isn't bearing it alongside Jimmy and acting like it didn't happen, she can't help but break down and cry. It's a deeply personal and moving moment because it's such a convention break for the character, and if anything, makes her even more relatable and human. Now, let's go into the relationship of Jimmy and Kim because I honestly think this is one of the best relationship dynamics that I've ever seen. I can't really think of a lot that can compete because there's such an intriguing counterbalance dynamic to Jimmy and Kim's relationship. It, funnily enough, is like the scales of justice icon in which, when Kim and Jimmy are together, they're at an equilibrium point for each other. Now, this obviously isn't a good equilibrium, but it essentially enables Kim's worst impulses, while also tempering Jimmy's and keeping him in check. Jimmy, when in the presence of Kim, wants to be the best version of himself, so that she'll love him more. Seeing him grapple with the conundrum of whether or not he should tell her the truth about what happened in the desert was heart-wrenching because this moment could lead to their breakup. But it in fact actually strengthened their relationship because Jimmy told the truth and his core character wasn't tarnished by it. Then for Kim, she has a deep-seated exposure to criminal behavior through her mother. The show is kind of vague as to how much this impacted her, but it makes sense to get a rush from doing things that are slightly out of the law, as long as they aren't too far. So when around Jimmy, she can't help herself because it's euphoric for her to execute schemes with Jimmy that always pay off magnificently. When together, they balance each other out to an exact morality, and through their witty expertise in newfound gray area, they're unstoppable. Like them teaming up to tank Howard's character was one of the best arcs in television and had a wildly insane payoff that had me dying of laughter throughout. However, when Kim and Jimmy aren't together, the scales shift for the better for Kim and for the worse for Jimmy. I love how they explore this story-wise, because when Kim leaves Jimmy, she defaults to the most stereotypical vanilla good life, while Jimmy goes off the deep end and risks more and more for money. This duality is such a juicy, juxtaposing relationship that is oddly alluring, and because of this, it makes for an incredibly engaging character pairing. That and the way they left things between Kim and Jimmy was perfect, and really every ending for each of the characters goes above and beyond for great writing. Shifting my focus over to Jimmy now, what the show does for him is pretty incredible. They make one of the most complex characters in the Breaking Bad universe that has years of backstory that weaves into every nanosecond of his character's journey, whether that be his complicated relationship with Chuck, Kim anchoring him down, his criminal past as Slippin' Jimmy, his outlook on life in which there are only wolves and sheep, and his main goal in life being the pursuit of riches makes a delicious hot pot combination of a character. To me, he's just as interesting as Walter White. Now, Walter's overall arc, I think, is the magnum opus of character arcs in television period, but I think Jimmy as a character rivals Walter because he's just as rich. And I don't mean that literally. There's a ton of different scenes and aspects in which you can analyze and dive into for his character, but to stay within season 6, I absolutely love how the creators handled him for the finale. They essentially establish a character flaw through flashbacks in which Jimmy states he has no regrets in life. I love how they also do this with Mike and Walter because they really question Jimmy about the time machine question, like Jimmy only wanting to go back in the past to either make money or fix something as silly as an injury. But since we know Jimmy's past through the show, we know he's lying to himself.
If I had to do it all over again, I would maybe do some things differently.
That you have regrets?
I have regrets.
So the ending arc for Jimmy is that he wants to redeem himself and rectify his biggest regret in life, and that's to make amends with his true love, Kim. The way in which Vince Gilligan explores this path for the finale I think is utterly brilliant. Every scene is actually a building block element to get to Jimmy's redemption, despite it not being obvious. Like the flashbacks establishing the flaw, the present where Jimmy rolls his opposition by getting a 7-year plea deal, which was genius because he essentially hijacks Marie's victimhood testimony and throws himself into that pool by being a victim of Walter as well. Then to him figuring out that Kim confessed about Howard and is able to bring her to the court, which sparks a revelation in which he can rectify his biggest regret, to the explosive climax of Jimmy admitting he did everything for money to vindicate himself in the eyes of Kim, and also the law, and then the cherry on top with him and Chuck in which we learn that Jimmy always loved Chuck deep down. To me, this is a perfect example of not a single wasted scene or moment that builds to an outstanding ending. It's yet another magnum opus ending within the Breaking Bad universe. It's also pretty insane because we both get the satisfaction of Jimmy destroying his opposition in court by getting a 7-year plea deal, but he also does the right thing character-wise by burning it all down to redeem himself. This overall tug-of-war between Jimmy's criminal instincts and his innocent aura of love with Kim is one of the best complexities a character has ever had. It makes Jimmy a perfect candidate for the main character of the series because there's always a ton of under-the-surface motivations, desires, and goals that makes him one of the most intriguing characters in television. Moving over to Mike, since he's also kind of the second main character of the series, due to him being the protagonist of the drug war plotline, he's obviously amazing. Mike has always been a fan favorite because of his lovable and honorable personality. Better Call Saul perfectly utilizes him and even has some incredible arcs for him. Even though it isn't in season 6, his season 5 arc with Werner Ziegler was outstanding. At first I thought this whole development was rather uninteresting about the whole backstory of the creation of the underground lab, but the second they imbue this with a heart-wrenching conflict of Werner defecting, it becomes magnetizing. Mike having to put him down is one of the biggest tragedies in the show, because Warner's essentially the embodiment of innocence. And that's a line Mike never wants to cross, but he knows that he is the lesser evil for killing Warner. It's one of the most gutting scenes in the show and is emotionally wrecking because Mike has never been this torn apart emotionally. And the second Werner realizes his fate, your heart sinks. He doesn't even try to fight for his life, and all he wanted to do was ensure the safety of his wife. Anytime this type of story situation happens, it's always gutting, like in Of Mice and Men and even The Green Mile. It's a free ticket to make you sob, and the way it's executed here does so much for Mike as a character. Mike's season 6 time isn't as great since the main focus is on Gus and Lalo, but this season actually has one of my favorite Mike scenes in which he meets Kim. It's a legendary pairing that sees the two most hardened and witty characters have a conversation, and that alone is just so entrancing. I wish it could have been longer, but Mike's observation that Kim was stronger than Jimmy was such a gratifying moment. I'd love to talk about Mike for hours, but let's move over to Nacho, who I thought was a major surprise. Nacho as a character is fundamentally lovable because he's a victim who desperately wants to escape to a better life, which he can do, but since his father is threatened with death, he chooses the selfless path of doing everything in the interest of his safety. It creates an endearing quality for the character in which we just want the best for Nacho. He's a crucial perspective within the world of Better Call Saul because he's at his core an underdog. We're always rooting for Nacho to succeed, but given the nature of the show in which anyone in the game receives major consequences, it turns Nacho's overall story into a tragedy. His ending, like everyone in the show, is flawless and is imbued with an extremely raw and intense performance, along with his entire journey up until that point being a crazily gripping ride throughout. Michael Mando is an excellent gem of an actor who goes all out in every scene he's in. I loved him all the way back in Far Cry 3 as Voss, and I hope he can get more work in the future. But regardless, his rendition of Nacho will probably always be his best work, and due to there being so many other great characters and actors in Better Call Saul, I think he'll sadly be overlooked, especially given the amount of competition at the Emmys because he didn't even get nominated, which feels like a crime, but to be fair, the competition is insane this year, although The White Lotus got a little too many nominations. So Nacho to me will always be a favorite because of how surprisingly well acted, written, and emotionally investing his entire story was. He's essentially the beating heart that carries the entire drug war plotline. Then within the sphere of the drug world of Better Call Saul, we have an amazing addition to the Salamanca family in Lalo. It's pretty crazy how the Salamancas already had so many great characters like Tuco, Hector, the twins, but yet, Vince Gilligan somehow creates the most intriguing member of the family for Better Call Saul. Lalo is a powerful figure with high intelligence, charisma, is cunning, patient, and my favorite aspect about Lalo is that he offsets his ferocity with an overwhelming presence of kindness. It creates an unnerving presence for the character because he gets under your skin with his fake charade of warmth that he then uses to catch characters off guard with his deadly seriousness. Anytime he gives off this fake smile, it creates such a captivating scenario in which you're trying to interpret what the character is actually thinking. It adds a lot of depth to Lalo in any given moment because he's a perpetual enigma, which in turn highlights how great both the writing and acting are for Lalo as a character. Any confrontation he has with an opposing character is absolutely riveting because his unpredictability makes him even more terrifying. Like whenever he has conversations with Jimmy and even Kim, you never know the direction it's going to go. I'd love to go into more depth about what makes Lalo such a great villain, but that would turn this already long video essay into feature length. He's hands down an outstanding villain, and it's really impressive how he was able to break through the already magnificent roster of iconic villains. Although, I wouldn't say he's the best, because that title definitely goes to Gus Fring. I really love how Better Call Saul adds a significant amount of detail to Gus and fleshes him out even more. Seeing the more personal side of Gus gives viewers more context to the iconic villain that we didn't get to see a lot of in Breaking Bad. We learn more details about his character, like his exacting and OCD-like personality that leads to him being very observant. The way in which this comes through the most is how he analyzes people with his cold and unnerving stare. I'll go into more about this through the subtle and detailed acting portion of the video because any scene with Gus constantly oozes subtextual value for storytelling, and that's all done through his immaculate performance. He's a character that requires an exacting attention to detail because there are so many intricacies that are constantly telling the audience what he's thinking. He's also arguably the smartest character in the Breaking Bad universe, probably just barely under Walter, but this makes his entire story thoroughly intriguing. His overall war with Lalo was submerged in immense tension, and the way in which Gus overcomes it was a stroke of brilliance. This also makes him a better character because in Breaking Bad, he primarily loses to Walter on multiple fronts, but in Better Call Saul, it brings back the mastermind aspect of Gus Fring and shows him in his full power besting an opponent, thus making him even more deadly and terrifying. Which the way he does defeat Lalo was like a Jigsaw level galaxy brain play, in which he predicted and accounted an exact outcome in which he could be brought down to his lab. And every step of the way, Gus made it very convincing that Lalo had won, when in reality, Gus was always in control. So Better Call Saul actually makes Gus an even greater villain, because we get to see him overcome more conflict in his prime, while also getting much more detailed characteristics for the character. Just a perfect way to handle Gus that obviously isn't done in any kind of nostalgia baity way. He serves an integral function to the story and isn't just here because he was a fan favorite villain, which a lot of the times when fan favorite characters return in popular franchises, it's really only done to make money, while here it actually elevates Gus. Now, going into what I would say is my least favorite character, we have Howard. And that's literally only because his competition is so insane that by virtue, he's my least favorite. Which isn't to say he's a bad character because he's still fantastic and I love him. And if anything, the ending of Howard excels him to a legendary status because I'd honestly make the argument that Howard may have the best ending in Better Call Saul. And that isn't just because his ending is shocking, and instead, it's the tragedy of it all. This moment in the story absolutely floors you because you never assume a character like Howard to be entangled by the cartel. But hey, actions have consequences, and I think this is also a perfect way to really punish Kim and Jimmy. Initially, I thought there could be a possibility of Howard killing himself in front of Jimmy and Kim, which would kind of mirror Chuck's suicide ending. But that was immediately swatted away with the introduction of the candle, which I'll talk about later in the hidden meeting section of the video. Because this scene in general I think is a complete masterclass in filmmaking, and I wanted to analyze it further. But going back to Howard's death, I think Lalo abruptly killing him is infinitely more tragic than a suicide ending because this tragedy was forced onto Howard. Right when he states that he's going to overcome his shortcomings, he dies. He was going to become a better person and fight the toxicity of Jimmy and Kim's powerful duo, but sadly, that optimistic future was ripped away from him. That and the implications of what this does to Howard's character overall is even more depressing because now all that people remember him as is a coke addict who killed himself. It yet again means that Jimmy and Kim destroys the legacy of a character, although Kim didn't really have that much involvement with Chuck's downfall. However, Howard is more tragic to me because it not only tarnishes his reputation, but he was also an innocent character who was unfortunately at the wrong place at the wrong time. So in general, the creators use Howard's death to really punctuate the terrible ways in which Jim and Kimmy affect people. His character kind of ascends and fulfills a higher story purpose, and that's something he never would have expected to happen with a character like Howard. Now, before going into the perfect prequel portion of the video, I feel like it would be a disservice to the show if I didn't mention Chuck. I'm trying to base this video around the final season of the show and why it's the best season of television in 2023, while also being an overall analysis. But Chuck is inherently an important part of Better Call Saul. His relationship and overall feud with Jimmy had a magnificent arc of plenty of ups and downs throughout the 4 seasons, and one of the best moments is easily his court monologue ranting about Jimmy. It's an excellent and euphoric moment of payoff, since Chuck has always held this hate under the surface and never expressed it out loud to anyone, unless if it was straight to Jimmy's face. But finally hearing this hate pour out in public was like popping a massive pimple and watching all the pus pour out. There's a lot to be analyzed between Chuck and Jimmy that could also span another big video essay, but one aspect that really intrigues me is the subjective lens in which we view Chuck as a character. Because in the show objectively, Chuck is a beloved character who has done so much good in his career, but yet, the writers only show us the bad side of Chuck, a spiteful, revenge-fueled brother that will never drop his prejudice against Jimmy. Due to the subjective lens, it rallies us behind Jimmy and shows us the true nature of Chuck. We're not shown the great side of all of his good deeds, and most of his flashbacks generally show him in a bad light. And I also love how by orientation to Jimmy, Chuck is actually the antagonist of the first 4 seasons. seasons. Chuck causes most of the conflict that Jimmy overcomes, and it just creates such an interesting dynamic because on paper, Chuck should be a hero. It establishes a notion that despite how good you are, you can still have deep character flaws, and that makes Chuck feel so human. Vince Gilligan is an utter genius for creating such an insanely rich roster of characters that I can honestly keep gushing about. But there are still 4 other categories that excel Better Call Saul into being the best show of 2023. Prequels in general can be very hard because you can fall into the trap of creating an uninteresting story from the audience already knowing the ending of the main plot. So there's a lot of aspects you have to account for to make a prequel just as great as the original. The first aspect is the choice to focus the narrative on Jimmy. If this was a prequel of Walter White as an example, it wouldn't be as investing because we already know the set of events with Elliot and the company Walter left, along with there not being much left to learn about Walter as a character. Through the course of Breaking Bad, the amount of backstory we get for Saul Goodman is pretty thin. We understand Saul Goodman, but there's a lot of background context that can be added to his character. So in general, the show operates to fundamentally expand and fully flesh out Jimmy as a character. Great prequels add to the characters at hand, and any mediocre prequel that tackles pre-established characters are never really that intriguing, because they lack exciting character development, and oftentimes communicate redundant information that was already communicated in the original. That, and despite the show being called Better Call Saul, Mike also acts as a dual lead in the narrative because he has an entire plotline dedicated to him. Now, I wouldn't say that Mike needed a lot more development character-wise because his motivations are relatively simple, and his personality is mostly the same. However, the main interesting question for Mike is how he ended up working with Gus and Jimmy. That's a major motivator in capturing the audience's interest because, for a prequel, you also need to tell a story that will thoroughly entertain the audience. And this aspect of the story is inherently a mystery in Breaking Bad. What the writers came up with for these 2 leads was insanely captivating, while also greatly expanding upon the world of Breaking Bad. Because that's another thing that every prequel needs to do. If you aren't exploring anything new or are mostly retreading old waters, then you're doing a disservice to the world you're telling your story in. You have to introduce new elements into the narrative that the audience don't know the resolution of, like examples being Nacho, Lalo, Howard, Chuck, and Kim. These are all characters that are new to us, and thus we don't know their endings. The only character out of this roster that you'll know the ending of is Lalo because he's obviously not in Breaking Bad and his opponent, Gus Fring, survives their conflict. However, the outcome of this conflict isn't the alluring part of the story, and instead, it's the way in which Gus overcomes Lalo as a villain. Their tug-of-war of conflict throughout seasons 5 and 6 was incredible and features some of the most witty and engaging mind games. This is a complicated game of chess, and despite us knowing that Gus wins that game of chess, the way it's played is deeply riveting. And even though we can infer the ending of Lalo's character, we don't know how he'll impact other characters like Jimmy and Kim. Our only assurance is that Jimmy survives Breaking Bad, but the fate of Kim is in question, and that in turn makes us fear for her safety. Which, this is something that prequels need because without this, it can lead to shallow stakes from us knowing the outcomes of every part of the story. Stakes and relative uncertainty as to where the story is leading is what hooks the audience, makes them want to keep watching. Better Call Saul supplies this in every season, and essentially gets to a point in seasons 5 and 6 where it even matches the quality of Breaking Bad. Like the resolutions of Nacho and Howard were sublime, and these kind of moments being in a prequel of all things is insanely impressive, given how hard it is to create unpredictable plot threads in a prequel story. Then one more aspect about Better Call Saul is that it's also a sequel to Breaking Bad. So not only does it add a lot of context to the story and characters in the past, it also gives extended resolutions to existing characters. Like one of the main ones being Marie Schrader. Her testimony against Jimmy was deeply emotional, and she utterly rails into him. It gives her character more of a satisfactory end because she gets her justice against Jimmy, and more than just him going to jail because she got to confront him. Then for Jimmy, the creators could have left Saul Goodman's end rather ambiguous, like Jesse's, but it's an inherent upgrade than him just being in hiding for the rest of his life. Like, sure, you can go in that direction for the story, but it makes for a stronger conclusion to continue it and create a better payoff for Jimmy as a character, in which he gets a redemption. The fact that Better Call Saul is able to continue the story and create another ending that goes above perfection is mind-boggling to me. Vince Gilligan and his creative team are just geniuses. So Better Call Saul as a show is more than just a perfect prequel, but ascends the story foundations of prequels and does even more. And before moving on, I find it really interesting how they use the black and white style for the present, despite that generally being used to portray the past. To me, it kind of portrays the notion that Jimmy's life is in general desaturated and lifeless, and is a husk of himself. So not only is the continued story outstanding, but Vince Gilligan is also making interesting creative decisions to make the story even deeper. For the next two topics, I'm going to combine them since creative visual storytelling and the hidden meaning shown through it go hand in hand. I feel like it's been a while since cinematography of this caliber always makes me question and look into the deeper meaning of what it's trying to convey. Better Call Saul, from the blocking of actors, framing, lighting, scene transitions, and more, are all extremely deliberate and conveys some kind of additive message that aids the script. To me, this elevates the show because it makes it significantly more engaging. And with engaging cinematography, it makes you an active participant who is trying to pick up on all the small details that these genius creators leave behind. It's, in its rawest form, the definition of show don't tell, in which you want to engage the audience mentally with not just words but every frame. Even singular or quick shots can convey so much information that it essentially adds an additional dimension to the storytelling. Like, let me play this one scene transition and see if you can spot the deeper meaning of what the creators are trying to communicate. Now, initially, this may not seem like anything major, but given the future events of the show where Jimmy and Kim split up, I believe this is a small nugget of foreshadowing. It can't be a coincidence that we hard cut from a shot of Jimmy and Kim kissing to someone cutting a piece of wood in half, which also happens to be where the two characters used to be in the frame. Now, for me personally, I knew that Kim and Jimmy would most likely split up by the end of the show, so this scene transition immediately caught my attention. Now, even past the usage of creative cinematography, the creators regularly use metaphors to convey certain messages that makes the show even more thought-provoking. The biggest example is the creators putting a lot of emphasis on the ants devouring this ice cream cone. For me, I interpret this as Jimmy being the ice cream cone and the ants being the cartel. Jimmy at this point in the story is relatively innocent and has not yet been fully corrupted. Or you can even interpret this past the cartel and apply it to Jimmy's entire later life of only being surrounded by criminals. His innocence as a lawyer and someone who wants to do some amount of good has completely melted away. The moment that cements this metaphor is Jimmy's reaction to the ice cream cone and us seeing his overall dissatisfaction. He knows that there is no going back and his future is going to be very grim. Another great example is the opening of episode 3 of season 6, where we have this long tracking shot that reveals a beautiful blue flower in the desert, alongside a piece of glass. At first, this doesn't mean anything to the viewer until we see the ending and find out that this piece of glass is what Nacho used to escape with. So in a heartfelt way, the creators are signifying that this gorgeous blue flower represents Nacho. He was the innocent flower amidst the desolate and miserable wasteland of the drug world. It's a really intelligent moment that rewards the viewer for paying attention to the details of the show. And the second the episode ended with that final shot, I was kind of blown away. And you can also interpret the storm in the beginning as Nacho's upcoming dark fate. Now, even going past metaphors, the creators also use certain objects and scenes and imbue them with a certain importance. A subtle example that I love is the candle announcing the arrival of Howard and Lalo. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's unnatural to establish an element like this when Howard already announces himself via knocking. It's a redundant piece of information that instead acts to establish an alternate way of announcing the entrance of a character. So when it inevitably comes back up again with Lalo's sudden entrance, you as a viewer immediately know what's happening. Also, this is the part that I love, but if you're really paying attention to this unconventional shot, it adds a layer of mystery and overall dread to the scene. Because now you're asking yourself, why did the creator suddenly use this candle and will it come back up again? Meaning that there could be an additional surprise character that shows up towards the end of the scene. Along with the framing of Howard's entrance being somewhat mysterious, in which he isn't revealed until he's in the apartment, and all we have is Jimmy's reaction. Which is partially similar to the dread-like feeling of Lalo entering the apartment, where he emerges from the shadows. This in contrast to the first time Lalo shows up to the apartment is different because, initially, it was meant as a sudden surprise, while here, the creators build this uneasy atmosphere with Howard's meltdown and climax it with Lalo killing him. That, and there's so much more to analyze just with this single scene, like with the lighting and overall color. It's shot in such a horror-like way of using atmospheric lighting to establish this anxious tone, along with the harsh oranges pushing Howard's manic realization even further. And guess what? There's even more to be analyzed with this scene through the evolution of the blocking, lighting, and editing. The scene with Howard starts in which he walks into the kitchen that is lit much brighter and doesn't communicate this uneasy tone yet. Then, as the scene progresses, he positions himself in front of this dark void in which the living room is behind him. Through this absence of light, it gives us less security because of that innate feeling of being scared of the dark. Like hell, that's how they brilliantly introduce Lalo into the scene. He starts out as the shadow creeping into the frame behind Howard, which significantly adds to the horror. Then for the editing, the scene first starts with using wide shots, and over the course of it, the shots get tighter and tighter. It progresses this feeling of claustrophobia and essentially ends with a close-up on Howard, and the second we finally get to this shot, we immediately know that something is off. Because through basic escalation, we know that this closest shot is essentially the climax, and it's framed in such a way to keep the background behind him visible. Like, sorry if I'm overanalyzing this one scene, but I think this illustrates the point in which there's an insane amount of subtext and under the surface subtle storytelling that is happening in almost every scene. I'm mainly highlighting Howard's death scene because I think it's a perfect combination of everything, whether that be through cinematography, editing, blocking, props, coloring, and more. It's invigorating as a viewer to really sink your teeth into these scenes because there's so much depth to them. Every aspect of filmmaking is operating at such a high quality that it makes the show a true feast. Like, Vince Gilligan isn't just a writing genius, but a filmmaking genius. Through and through, one of the most brilliant scenes of a show I watched, and it isn't just great because it was shocking, but because of how genius the creators went about in telling it. Another scene that really caught my attention that I want to point out before moving on was the way in which they edited Jimmy and Kim going about their lives while Mike cleaned up their apartment. Now, I'm a sucker for amazing scene transitions because they can really boost the cleverness of your film or show. And the vast majority of the time, filmmakers don't do anything special with them. However, here, contrasting Mike, Jimmy, and Kim's day with match cuts and resolves was utterly brilliant. Through them cutting between the coffee pouring into a cup to squeezing out blood into a bucket, Mike washing blood off the floor to Jimmy soaking up the red sauce of his lunch with bread, Kim providing evidence of a dead victim to Mike looking at a picture where Howard's body used to be, every transition in the scene is infused with so much creativity that it makes it incredibly thought-provoking. This attention to detail and planning out these scene transitions elevates the art in my opinion. It shows how much care the creators are putting into this scene because this goes past just editing. The creators have to plan out these shots and think about the significance of their meaning and how it adds more to the story. To me, it establishes a genius parallel between these three characters of juxtaposing their ordinary lives to the horror of what's going on in their home. It's brilliant, and so are so many other scenes and shots within this artful show. For the last great aspect of Better Call Saul, I want to highlight how great the subtle acting is throughout the show, and how the creators use minimalist dialogue to let the actors really shine and carry the narrative through their performances. I said I was going to return to Gus Fring in this section, and that's because I think he's the best example of this subtle form of acting. His deadpan and blunt-like serious delivery creates a shroud of mystery as what his intentions and motivations are. Because of this, we have to really pay attention to the subtle intricacies of Giancarlo's performance to pick up on the smallest of details that allude to different aspects of the story. Like one of my favorite examples being his talk with Hector Salamanca after the death of Lalo. Hector as well, especially with his added context through Better Call Saul, really adds a deeper layer to his acting. Every moment you can see Hector's emotion pour through his performance, despite not being able to deliver any lines of dialogue. Like his reaction to hearing Lalo's voice and transforming his expression from being depressed to excited was great. But going back to his scene with Gus, I love the subtle mind games on display here. Gus picks up on the small detail of Hector being partially proud and arrogant, when normally he hates Gus. This signals to Gus that something is wrong, which means that Lalo is most likely alive. From here, Gus bases his entire plan around Lalo being alive just from this one tiny little interaction. It's a genius moment for Gus as a character that makes him come across as being incredibly observant and intelligent. I also love the scene after Lalo's death in which he gets questioned by Don Eladio. This scene is infused with palm-sweating tension, and as an audience, we eagerly watch Giancarlo's performance for any minor tells. Subtle moments include Gus trying to hide his pain while being pat down by the security guard, Gus's long pondering introduction slightly portraying a nervous tone. When he says he has no response, there's a minor hesitant blink because he's making a ballsy play. Then when asked as to if that's truly his response to the allegation, he reaffirms his stance with a more confident delivery. As the scene progresses and Don Eladio makes the case for Gus, his stare hardens and becomes even more confident. And then this might also be a hidden meaning aspect or me overanalyzing, but when Gus looks over at Hector, there's a reflection of fire in Gus's glasses, which could portray his fiery hatred towards Hector. Or it could just be a coincidence, which again, there's a lot to be analyzed in so many scenes in Better Call Saul. But going back to the subtle acting point, this scene is thoroughly engaging because we have to pay strict attention to Gus's performance. There's so many subtleties and insinuations being made that it makes the story of the scene so complex and intriguing. I know scenes with reams of dialogue and monologues are clear standouts, but these types of smaller moments in which the dialogue falls away and performances take the forefront of our attention are equally as brilliant. That, and it's not just Gus, and there's a plethora of moments between every character in which the writers use minimalist dialogue to allow the acting of these great actors to carry the storytelling. Like, more examples are Nacho's final scene with Lalo, where Nacho has to internalize the oncoming doom of everyone's death in the compound. Almost any scene in the present with Jimmy. Kim's boiling anger towards Jimmy when he defects and goes against her wishes during the Mesa Verde problem. Lalo coldly considering Jimmy's proposal to send Kim to kill Gus, which drastically increased the tension. And almost every Mike scene, since his usage of dialogue is meticulous and efficient. The acting in Better Call Saul is outstanding, and it's unfortunate that Succession will most likely win every category it's nominated in. Our only true hope is that Rhea Seehorn wins for Best Supporting Actress because to me, she is the best in that category. I know I'm titling this video as being the best show of 2023, and that should in turn invite a compare and contrast between Succession and Better Call Saul, but both of these shows are easily 10 out of 10s, along with them being pretty different types of shows. So it's obviously off of your personal preference, and I just wanted to make a case for why Better Call Saul is the best show because I feel like it deserves more praise. It's one of the most brilliant shows I've ever seen, and thank you so much for watching this entire lengthy video essay. I didn't intend on it going this long, but it would have felt like a disservice to the show making it any shorter. Let me know in the comments what you think about Better Call Saul, and my socials are linked in the description. And again, thank you so much to my top patron, Logan Farmer. I can't express how thankful I am for you hitting the highest tier.